22nd of June, 1944, Byelorussian Soviet Socialist Republic, central sector of the Eastern Front. Between the 22nd of June and the 19th of August 1944, a single Soviet offensive, Operation Bagration, destroyed 28 of the 34 divisions of Germany's Army Group Center and inflicted around 450,000 casualties, the largest single defeat in German military history. In barely 3 weeks, Soviet forces captured hundreds of kilometers of territory and shattered an entire German army group that had held these lines since 1941. Yet, on the same continent, Western attention focused almost entirely on Normandy, where 156,000 Allied troops landed on the 6th of June in Operation Overlord. German High Command expected the main Soviet summer blow to fall in Ukraine. Army Group Center, with fewer tanks, fewer reserves, and weakened logistics, was assessed as holding a relatively quiet front. Within 5 weeks, much of it ceased to exist. How did one offensive eliminate a quarter of the German army in the east, yet remain marginal in many Western narratives? 1st of March, 1944, Eastern Front, Army Group Center Sector, Byelorusia. At the OKH, the Oberkommando de Heers, staff officers lean over situation maps showing a 1,000-kilometer eastern front stretching from the Baltic to the Carpathians. Red markers denote German commitments in Italy. Blue markers show preparations for an Allied invasion expected somewhere in France. The question on every officer's mind is simple. Where will the enemy strike next, and with what forces can Germany respond? Army Group Center commands 4 armies holding central Byelorusia. The 3rd Panzer Army stands in the north. The 4th Army holds the center. The 9th Army occupies the south. The 2nd Army anchors the southern flank. On paper, these formations list around 800,000 men. In reality, combat effective strength is closer to 500,000. Fuel reserves are low. Ammunition stocks are declining. The number of operational tanks and assault guns in the entire army group has fallen below 500. Soviet intelligence already notes the decline. From intercepted radio traffic and partisan reports, Soviet General Staff analysts see German division strengths shrinking month by month. Artillery batteries are incomplete. Infantry regiments report companies at half strength. Armor, once the backbone of German mobile defense, is being drawn off to other sectors, first to Army Group South, then to Army Group North Ukraine, where heavy fighting has raged since the start of the year. The logistics situation is worse. Rail line capacities, strained by partisan attacks and Allied bombing, cannot sustain the Army Group's needs. Supply depots hold a fraction of what they held in 1941. Fuel deliveries are irregular. Replacement flows for men and equipment have slowed to a trickle. Officers in the operations branch recognize the danger, but their assessments are overridden by strategic assumptions at higher command. Those assumptions rest on a simple calculation. If the Soviets attack, they will strike where German forces are already weak and where recent battles have created opportunities. Army Group North Ukraine in the south fits that profile. Heavy fighting there has drawn Soviet reserves and attention. German intelligence estimates, shaped by this logic, conclude that the main Soviet summer blow will fall against Army Group North Ukraine. Army Group Center, by contrast, is assessed as a secondary sector, heavily stretched but not under immediate threat. Soviet data tells a different story. Documents from the Soviet General Staff show that equipment levels in the front's opposite Army Group Center have increased 2-fold since January and 6-fold since 1941. New tanks and mechanized corps are forming in the operational rear. Artillery is being concentrated in sectors that German intelligence has dismissed as quiet. Ammunition and fuel stockpiles are being positioned for a major offensive. The Soviets are preparing to strike not where the Germans expect, but where they are weakest and least prepared. The misreading has consequences. Fewer reserves are allocated to Army Group Center than force ratios would justify. Defensive preparations remain incomplete. Armor that might have reinforced the center is sent south. The fortress towns designated to anchor the defense, Vitebsk, Orsha, Mogilev, Bobruisk, are ordered held at all costs, but the divisions assigned to defend them are hollow formations, understrength and ill-equipped for the battles ahead. By late August 1944, This secondary sector will have cost Germany losses comparable to Stalingrad. Army Group Center will effectively disappear from the order of battle. The question is not whether the army group will be destroyed, but how completely and how quickly. 15th of April, 1944, Army Group Center Headquarters, Minsk area, Byelorussian Soviet Socialist Republic. A staff officer reads out a directive from the Führer's headquarters. Vitebsk, Orsha, Mogilev, and Bobruisk are designated Festerplatz, fortress towns to be held, to the last man. Other officers mark thick circles around these cities on the situation map. The fortress concept, borrowed from medieval siegecraft and adapted to modern war, assumes that static strongpoints will absorb Soviet attacks and buy time for reserves to counterattack or rebuild a line further west. The reality at unit level contradicts the concept. German division and corps-level data show very low infantry density in some sectors. Around the 9th Army, certain frontline sectors hold as few as 143 men per kilometer. Artillery densities are far below doctrinal standards. Anti-tank guns are scarce. Motor transport, essential for mobile defense, is almost non-existent in many formations. The defensive system itself is incomplete. The Tiger and Hessen lines, intended as fallback positions west of the main front, exist mostly on paper. Field fortifications are shallow. Secondary positions lack depth. Minefields are sparse. The fortress cities themselves, though designated as anchors, lack the resources to withstand prolonged sieges. Trenches and bunkers ring the cities, but engineering works are improvised and limited. Anti-tank ditches are narrow. Ammunition stocks are low. German infantry divisions in Army Group Center are hollow formations. Many have been reduced to 4,000 to 6,000 men, half their authorized strength. Artillery regiments are incomplete. Anti-tank companies report fewer than half their authorized guns. Motorized elements have been stripped away to supply other sectors. What remains is an infantry force that can hold ground in static defense but cannot maneuver, cannot counterattack, and cannot withdraw quickly if threatened with encirclement. Field commanders recognize the danger. General Martinek, commanding in the Mogilev sector, quotes an old proverb to describe higher command's refusal to authorize timely withdrawals. Whom God would destroy, he first strikes blind. Other officers submit situation reports highlighting the weakness of the defensive system and the vulnerability of the fortress towns. The reports are read, filed, and ignored. The fortress orders lock weakened divisions into exposed positions and remove the flexibility that German doctrine once prized. Earlier in the war, German forces on the Eastern Front relied on elastic defense and mobile reserves to absorb Soviet attacks, counterattack penetrations, and withdraw when necessary to avoid encirclement. By April 1944, political orders had replaced operational doctrine. Fortress cities must be held regardless of tactical sense. Units must stand and fight regardless of force ratios. Withdrawal, even to prepared positions, is forbidden without explicit permission from the Führer's headquarters. The contradiction between orders and reality sets the stage for disaster. Within 10 weeks, 3 of the named fortresses, Vitebsk, Bobruisk, and Mogilev, will be encircled and destroyed. Their garrisons, locked in place by fortress orders, will be written off in German strength returns. The static strongpoints intended to anchor the defense will become mass graves. The fortress concept, applied to a weakened and overextended army group, will transform a difficult operational situation into a catastrophic defeat. 30th of May, 1944, Moscow, Stavka headquarters. A directive is placed before Stalin, Vasilevsky, and Zhukov. The final version of the Byelorussian offensive plan is ready for approval. The objective is explicit: the destruction of Germany's Army Group Center and an advance to the Vistula River and the borders of East Prussia, in coordination with operations further south. 4 Soviet fronts are assigned to Bagration. The 1st Baltic Front will attack in the north. The 3rd Belarusian Front will strike the center. The 2nd Belarusian Front will target Mogilev and the Dnieper crossings. The 1st Belarusian Front will encircle Bobruisk and advance towards Minsk from the south. Together, these fronts command approximately 1.6 to 2.4 million men, over 5,000 tanks and self-propelled guns, around 32,000 to 36,000 artillery pieces and mortars, and some 5,000 to 8,000 aircraft. Equipment availability has multiplied compared to earlier campaigns. Formations that were shattered in 1941 and 1942 have been reconstituted and re-equipped. Tank and mechanized corps now possess the mobility and firepower to conduct deep operations. Artillery has been concentrated in unprecedented densities. Maskirovka operational deception is central to the plan. False radio traffic simulates preparations in Ukraine. Feigned movements suggest an offensive against Army Group North Ukraine. Major formations are moved at night. Strict camouflage and emission control are enforced in Byelorusia. Bridgeheads on the Dnieper are disguised. Ammunition and fuel stockpiles are hidden in forests. Soviet operational orders emphasize that success depends on achieving surprise at the operational level, preventing German reserves from reinforcing the threatened sectors, and paralyzing enemy command and control. Partisan coordination adds another dimension. Soviet partisan detachments in Belarus receive orders to intensify attacks on rail lines, bridges, and communications immediately before and during the offensive. Documented figures from earlier rail war phases show partisans destroying tens of thousands of rails in single operations. One Belarusian account records that on a single night, a partisan brigade destroyed 860 rails on the Mogilev-Orsha line in about an hour. Similar missions are planned for other critical lines. The combination of deception and partisan disruption is intended to delay German recognition of the main effort, prevent timely reinforcement, and complicate any large-scale withdrawal. Soviet operational analyses emphasize that Maskirovka and partisan action are among the most important elements of Bagration. If executed correctly, they will ensure that when the barrage opens, German forces will be outnumbered, outgunned, and strategically misinformed. German intelligence, despite these clear preparations, fails to read the signs. OKH still rates Byelorusia as a secondary sector going into June. Reconnaissance reports note increased Soviet activity but interpret it as defensive preparations or limited offensives. The possibility that the main Soviet summer effort will fall on Army Group Center is dismissed. Reserves remain positioned in the south. Armor continues to be drawn off to other sectors. Fortress orders keep divisions locked in exposed positions. When the barrage opens on the 22nd of June, Army Group Center will face the largest offensive the Eastern Front has yet seen, and it will be completely unprepared. 22nd of June, 1944, front from Polotsk to Rogachev and Moser, Byelorussian Soviet Socialist Republic. Dawn on the 22nd of June. German sentries in forward positions report unusually heavy Soviet artillery registration fires. Within hours, entire sectors erupt in sustained barrage. The offensive begins on the anniversary of Operation Barbarossa, the German invasion of the Soviet Union 3 years earlier. The symbolism is not lost on Soviet planners. Soviet fronts opened with massive artillery preparations along the sectors of 1st Baltic, 3rd Byelorussian, 2nd Byelorussian, and 1st Byelorussian fronts. Artillery densities in key breakthrough sectors exceed 150 to 200 guns and mortars per kilometer, supported by hundreds of tanks and assault guns per army. Heavy guns, Katyusha rocket launchers, and direct-fire assault guns pound German positions. The barrage is not random. It is sequenced and coordinated. Registration fires identify targets. The main barrage destroys bunkers, trenches, and strong points. Rolling barrages cover infantry as they cross minefields and assault forward positions. In the Mogilev sector, fog delays the preliminary bombardment until 0900 on the 23rd of June. The barrage lasts 2 hours. The Red Army employs a double rolling barrage to cover the infantry assault across the Dnieper. German defenders report the ground shaking, trees splintering, and entire trench systems collapsing under the weight of fire. Similar patterns are reported in the Bobruisk and Vitebsk sectors. German expectations are shattered. OKH had anticipated Soviet probing attacks but not a full-scale strategic offensive along a 700 to 1,000 kilometer front. Initial reports describe strong artillery activity and heavy Soviet attacks, but lack a clear picture of the scale. Front-level staff struggle to assess the situation. Communications are disrupted by partisan attacks on telephone lines. Air reconnaissance is limited by Soviet air superiority. By the end of the first day, the German command still did not understand that this was the main Soviet summer offensive. Soviet documents emphasize that surprise is achieved at the operational level. German reserves remain mispositioned in the south. Army Group Center's own reserves are scattered and insufficient to contain multiple breakthrough attempts. Engineering assets, assault engineer battalions trained to clear minefields, bridge rivers, and destroy bunkers, are deployed in the first wave. By the end of the first day, small but significant breaches had opened in several sectors. The initial breaches are not spectacular, but they are decisive. The 3rd Panzer Army's Northern Corps is already under severe pressure. Soviet forces have crossed the Dwina in some sectors and are pushing towards the rear. The 9th Army's forward positions around Rogachev are collapsing. The 2nd Byelorussian Front is forcing the Dnieper near Mogilev. The quiet sector has clearly transformed into the main battlefield. By the end of the first 24 hours, several German frontline regiments had been destroyed or forced back. Communications between Corps and Army headquarters are intermittent. Requests for reinforcements multiply. The scale of the Soviet offensive is becoming clear, but the opportunity to respond has already passed. Army Group Center is facing a strategic catastrophe, and it does not yet fully understand what is happening. 23rd to 27th of June, 1944, Vitebsk, Orsha Sector, Byelorussian Soviet Socialist Republic. Staff maps at 3rd Panzer Army headquarters show the Vitebsk salient protruding east into Soviet-held territory. The salient has been held since 1941. It anchors the northern flank of Army Group Center and controls key road and rail junctions. On the 23rd of June, Soviet attacks began to erode its flanks. The Soviet operational design is clear. 1st Baltic Front attacks from the north. 3rd Byelorussian Front strikes from the south and east. The aim is to encircle German forces around Vitebsk and penetrate towards Orsha and the Minsk-Smolensk highway. 43rd Army and 6th Guards Army drive into 9th Corps' northern defenses. 5th Army smashes into 6th Corps south of the city. Within hours, German forward positions were overrun. Key crossings and road junctions are captured. The flanks of the salient begin to collapse. Vitebsk has been designated a Festerplatz, a fortress to be held at all costs. 53rd Corps, with around 4 divisions and some 30,000 men, finds itself increasingly threatened with encirclement as Soviet spearheads reach the rear of the salient. Corps commanders request permission to pull back to the Tiger Line, a prepared defensive position west of Vitebsk. The requests are refused. Hitler insists that at least 1 division must remain in Vitebsk and fight to the last man. An officer is to be sent in to enforce resistance. General Reinhardt, commanding 3rd Panzer Army, threatens to go into the pocket himself if withdrawal is not approved. Permission for a limited withdrawal comes too late. By the 26th of June, Soviet forces had closed the encirclement. 53rd Corps is trapped. Street fighting erupts in Vitebsk. German units attempt breakouts but are cut down by Soviet artillery and air attacks. By the 27th of June, resistance collapsed. Most of 53rd Corps is destroyed or captured. Soviet estimates and Western studies later record around 41,700 Germans killed and 17,800 captured in the Vitebsk-Orsha operation, along with over 120 tanks and nearly 1,900 vehicles. The destruction of 53rd Corps shatters 3rd Panzer Army as a coherent fighting force in this sector. The northern anchor of Army Group Center is gone. A wide gap opens between Army Group Center and Army Group North, threatening the latter's southern flank and enabling deep Soviet exploitation towards Polotsk and the Baltic. The paradox is clear. A city declared a fortress to hold the line becomes the point at which the line collapses. The fortress order, intended to stabilize the defense, instead ensures the destruction of an entire corps. The divisions that might have withdrawn in good order to a defensible line are trapped and annihilated. The northern salient, held for 3 years, is lost in less than a week. Army Group Center's northern flank is gone, and the offensive is only beginning. 24th to 29th of June, 1944, Bobruisk Sector, Berezina River, Byelorussian Soviet Socialist Republic. A Luftwaffe liaison officer watches from a forward airstrip as Soviet artillery begins a dense barrage over 9th Army's positions. Reports from forward units describe entire regimental sectors under fire. The ground shakes, trees splinter. The noise is continuous and overwhelming. Konstantin Rokossovsky's 1st Belarusian Front had argued for and received approval for a double envelopment around Bobruisk. The 3rd Army will strike in the north. The 65th Army will attack in the south. Together, they will encircle Hans Jordan's 9th Army. Force ratios are stark. Close to 500,000 Soviets against fewer than 100,000 Germans. Soviet superiority in artillery, armor, and air support is overwhelming. On the 24th of June, the barrage begins. Approximately 7,000 guns, mortars, and Katyusha rocket launchers pound German positions. The barrage is not brief. It continues for hours, systematically destroying bunkers, trenches, and strongpoints. When the infantry advance begins, German defensive fire is weak and disorganized. 3rd Army breaks 35th Corps' lines in the north. The 65th Army penetrates the 41st Panzer Corps sector in the south. Within days, multiple German divisions were trapped east of Bobruisk against the Berezina. Bobruisk itself, designated a Festerplatz, becomes the center of a collapsing pocket. Soviet air attacks pound crossing points, columns, and bridges. Continuous artillery fire restricts German movement inside the pocket. Attempts to break out are met with massed fire. Vasily Grossman, a Soviet war correspondent, enters the battlefield after the pocket collapses. His account, published at the time and later, describes the density of German dead and wrecked vehicles. Men are walking over German corpses. Vehicles have to drive over the corpses, so densely they lie upon the ground. This is a contemporary primary source, not a later exaggeration. Soviet and German sources converge on similar figures: roughly 50,000 Germans killed, about 20,000 captured, and only about 12,000 managing to escape. The destruction of 9th Army removes Army Group Center's southern shield and opens the direct route to Minsk from the south. It also eliminates much of the Army Group's artillery and armor in this sector. By the 28th of June, German command acknowledged the 9th Army as effectively destroyed. Yet Hitler still refuses to permit large-scale withdrawals of 4th Army further north, sealing the fate of those units. The fortress concept has failed again. Bobruisk, ordered held at all costs, has become a trap. The army ordered to defend it has been annihilated. The Berezina, which might have been a defensible line, is now behind Soviet forces. The route to Minsk is open, and Army Group Center is disintegrating. 23rd to 28th of June, 1944, Mogilev Sector, Dnieper, Berezina Corridor, Byelorussian Soviet Socialist Republic. Inside 4th Army headquarters, orders arrive confirming that Mogilev has been designated a Festerplatz. Local commanders are instructed that the city is to be held to the last man. The 4th Army, under Kurt von Tippelskirch, holds the Mogilev sector with the 39th Panzer Corps and 12th Corps. The city is an important road and rail junction. Its loss would disrupt German logistics and communications across the central sector. The 2nd Belarusian Front's task is to capture Mogilev, force the Dnieper crossings, and pin 4th Army long enough for encirclement operations further west to develop. On the 23rd of June, the 49th Army opened with a heavy artillery barrage. The assault across the Dnieper is difficult. Soviet casualties are high in the first waves. German defenders hold key crossing points and strong points. But the Soviets commit fresh forces continuously, and German reserves are limited. 4th Army commanders requested permission to pull back to the Tiger Line, a prepared defensive position west of Mogilev. The requests are repeatedly refused because of the fortress order. Elite units like Feldherrnhall are fed into the fight piecemeal to hold bridges and strongpoints. The commitment of reserves reduces the army's flexibility and depletes units that might have been used for counterattacks or withdrawal operations. Soviet forces penetrate the outer defenses. Urban fighting erupts in Mogilev. Soviet infantry and armor push through streets and buildings. German defenders resist, but the outcome is inevitable. By the 27th to 28th of June, the city is encircled and captured. General von Erdmannsdorf and much of the 12th Infantry Division are lost. Soviet estimates put German casualties in the Mogilev offensive at around 33,000 killed and 3,250 captured. The operational goal is achieved. Fourth Army is depleted and delayed. Many of its units are still east of Minsk when the larger encirclement forms. By forcing the Fourth Army to stand and fight in Mogilev rather than withdrawing in time, the Soviets turned a tactical battle into an operational disaster for the Germans. The fortress order, once again, has directly contributed to the destruction of its defenders. Within days of Mogilev's fall, large portions of the Fourth Army were trapped in the Minsk pocket. The divisions that fought to hold the city will not escape. The fortress, intended to anchor the defense, has become a weight dragging the army down. The Dnieper, which might have been a defensible line, is now behind Soviet forces. The route to encirclement is open, and Fourth Army is running out of time. 26th to 28th of June, 1944, Army Group Center Headquarters and Hitler's Wolfschanz, East Prussia. At Hitler's headquarters, Field Marshal Ernst Busch reports worsening news. Vitebsk is encircled. The Bobruisk sector is collapsing. Mogilev is under heavy assault. The 3rd Panzer Army is shattered. The 9th Army is effectively destroyed. The 4th Army is pinned and bleeding. The front is disintegrating. Busch requests immediate authorization to withdraw behind the Dnieper and shorten the front to save remnants of his armies. The request is based on operational necessity. Without withdrawal, entire formations will be encircled and destroyed. Hitler refuses. He insists on holding present positions and maintaining fortress cities. He claims the Soviets will exhaust themselves against prepared defenses. He orders continued resistance. By late June, roughly 250,000 to 300,000 men and about 25 divisions had been lost or rendered ineffective under Busch's command during Bagration. The scale of the losses is comparable to Stalingrad. The operational map at Army Group Center Headquarters fills rapidly with symbols for lost divisions and encircled formations. Staff officers struggle to maintain an accurate picture of the front. On the 28th of June, Hitler dismisses Busch and appoints Walter Model to take command of Army Group Center. Model is known for his record in defensive crises. He has stabilized collapsing fronts before, but the situation he inherits is beyond stabilization. The 3rd Panzer Army is shattered. The 9th Army is destroyed. The 4th Army is heavily engaged and partly encircled. Large gaps exist in the front. Real reserves to plug them do not exist. Post-war German and Allied analyses characterize Model's appointment as too late to save Army Group Center. His realistic task is to reconstruct some form of defensive line further west, on the Berezina or failing that, closer to the Vistula. The refusal to authorize timely retreat has transformed what might have been a major withdrawal into the destruction of entire armies. The command change occurs after the decisive damage has been done. Within 1 week of Model taking command, Minsk will fall. Tens of thousands of German prisoners, many from his new command, will be marched through Moscow in a public demonstration of the collapse. The fortress strategy has failed. The static defense has failed. The refusal to withdraw has turned operational difficulty into catastrophe. Army Group Center, as it existed on the 22nd of June, no longer exists. 29th of June to 4th of July, 1944, Minsk and surrounding area, Byelorussian Soviet Socialist Republic. Soviet reconnaissance reports show columns of German troops, vehicles, and guns retreating westward along limited roads from Bobruisk, Mogilev, and east of Minsk. Stavka orders emphasize the need to cut the escape routes. 1st and 3rd Belarusian fronts are tasked with encircling Minsk. 5th Guards Tank Army and other mobile units advance rapidly west and northwest. Infantry armies follow to secure ground and reduce strong points. German forces retreating towards Minsk include remnants of 4th Army, elements of 9th Army, and other units. Estimates put the total at around 100,000 men. These are not fresh, well-equipped formations. They are survivors of earlier battles, low on ammunition, fuel, and vehicles. Many are on foot. Communications are intermittent. Command and control is breaking down. Soviet forces capture key road hubs and river crossings. The timing is precise. By the end of June and early July, the encirclement west of Minsk is effectively closed. German units inside the pocket attempt breakouts, but Soviet forces hold the ring. Artillery and air attacks pound German columns. Fuel and ammunition run out. Organization collapses. On the 3rd of July, Soviet forces enter Minsk. Urban fighting is brief. German defenders are overwhelmed. The city is declared liberated by the end of the day. Between the 4th and 11th of July, Soviet forces systematically reduced the pocket east of Minsk. Infantry assaults, artillery bombardments, and air attacks destroy German units piecemeal. Attempts to break out are met with massed fire. Only a fraction of the 100,000 soldiers trapped in the pocket escape. On the 17th of July 1944, roughly 50,000 German prisoners captured in the Minsk Bulge marched through Moscow. The columns march 20 abreast. It takes over an hour for them to pass. The parade is a public demonstration of Soviet victory and German defeat. Newsreels broadcast the images around the world. The fall of Minsk and destruction of the pocket meant Army Group Center had effectively ceased to exist as a coherent formation. 25 German divisions and around 250,000 troops have vanished, killed, wounded, or missing. The fortress strategy is in ruins. The static defense has collapsed. The Central Eastern Front is gone. Yet Bagration is not over. Soviet forces continue to push towards Polotsk, Vilnius, and the Niemen. The offensive that destroyed an army group is now exploiting the collapse to reshape the strategic map of Eastern Europe. 29th of June to 13th of July, 1944, Polotsk and Vilnius sectors, Byelorussian Soviet Socialist Republic and Lithuania. Soviet operational maps for 1st Baltic and 3rd Belarusian fronts now show objectives not just in Belorussia, but in Lithuania and towards the Baltic. Orders emphasize pursuing the broken enemy and seizing key transport hubs. At Polotsk, 1st Baltic Front pursues remnants of 3rd Panzer Army. The Polotsk offensive runs from the 29th of June to the 4th of July. Polotsk is a major rail and road center, important for links between Army Group Center's remnants and Army Group North. Soviet 4th Shock and 6th Guards armies attack with heavy artillery support. German defenders hold several divisions in the city, but they are under strength and demoralized. Fighting culminates with capture of the main railway bridge over the Dwina. Street battles continue until the 4th of July. Soviet estimates claim around 37,000 Germans killed and 7,000 captured in the Polotsk operation. Stalin's Order of the Day salutes Polotsk's capture and orders a 20-gun salute in Moscow. The fall of Polotsk secures the northern flank and opens paths towards the Baltic. It also helps sever the land link between Army Group Center and Army Group North. Simultaneously, 3rd Belarusian Front drives on Vilnius. Stavka's order of the 4th of July directs the front to seize Vilnius by the 10th of July and force the Niemen crossings. Vilnius is a major communications hub between East Prussia and the Baltic. By the 8th of July, main Soviet forces reached the city. The 5th Guards Tank Army encircles it while the 5th Army enters the outskirts. German defenders include elements of several divisions and paratroop units. Resistance is strong, but the outcome is not in doubt. Soviet encirclement and street fighting cost the Germans at least 8,000 killed and 5,000 captured in Vilnius alone. Only about 3,000 managed to break out with General Stahel. Vilnius falls by the 13th of July. The capture of Polotsk and Vilnius represents more than tactical victories. They are strategic turning points. Polotsk's fall isolates Army Group North. Vilnius's capture cuts a major hub between East Prussia and the Baltic. Soviet forces are now pushing towards Kaunas and the Baltic shore, exploiting the breach opened by Bagration. The offensive that destroyed an army group is now positioning the Red Army on the Vistula, within operational reach of Berlin. 19th of August 1944, Soviet Byelorussia and Eastern Poland, end of Operation Bagration. Senior Soviet commanders review reports summarizing Bagration's results as the final offensive actions in the theater wind down. The numbers are staggering. Operation Bagration, fought from the 22nd of June to the 19th of August 1944, destroyed 28 of the 34 divisions of the German 3rd Panzer, 4th, and 9th Armies of Army Group Center. One Cambridge and Hoover analysis describes the outcome succinctly. Army Group Center is destroyed, its surviving elements pushed back to the Vistula. German casualties. Close to 30 divisions destroyed and about 450,000 German casualties. Killed, wounded, or captured. Some studies specify that under Bush alone, roughly 250,000 to 300,000 men and 25 divisions were lost before his replacement. Material losses include hundreds of tanks, assault guns, artillery pieces, and aircraft. Soviet losses are also heavy. Soviet casualties exceed 770,000 in the Bagration campaign, including killed, wounded, and missing. The victory was costly. The Red Army pays in blood for every kilometer of advance. But the Red Army is prepared to pay this price. Industrial capacity, manpower reserves, and logistical systems can sustain these losses. Germany cannot. Comparison with other battles is instructive. D-Day landed about 156,000 Allied troops in one day. Total Allied casualties in Normandy by late August were significant but lower in absolute enemy losses than Bagration's destruction of an entire German army group. At Stalingrad, combined Axis casualties in the broader campaign reached several hundred thousand, with about 300,000 to 400,000 German casualties often cited. Bagration's German losses are in the same or higher range and are incurred in about 8 weeks. Operational characteristics identified in professional studies include depth of the offensive, several hundred kilometers, coordination of multiple fronts, 4 fronts attacking simultaneously, integration of air power and partisan action, thousands of aircraft and tens of thousands of partisans, and the use of simultaneous encirclements, Vitebsk, Bobruisk, Minsk. One British Museum article characterizes Bagration as arguably the greatest military defeat of all time for Germany. After Bagration, Germany no longer has the central reserves or manpower to seriously contest both eastern and western fronts. The initiative has decisively passed to the Allies. The defeat of Nazi Germany is no longer a question of if, but when. The operation that destroyed an army group has changed the course of the war. Yet for many general audiences, Bagration remains relatively obscure outside specialist literature. The analytical paradox. An operation that destroyed an army group and inflicted higher German losses than most better-known battles remains marginal in Western public memory. 20th of August, 1944, Eastern Front from Belarus to the Vistula and the Baltic coast. A series of maps shows the front line before Bagration, spring 1944, and after late August 1944. The shift westward is several hundred kilometers. The strategic map of Eastern Europe has been redrawn. Territorial changes are dramatic. Belarus is liberated. Large parts of eastern Poland are in Soviet hands. Parts of Lithuania and Latvia are under Soviet control. Soviet forces approach East Prussia and the Vistula crossings opposite Warsaw. The German defensive line that held for 3 years is gone. The German force structure is in chaos. The destruction of Army Group Center forces Germany to reorganize its eastern front. New army groups are formed from remnants. Fresh but weaker formations are committed to hold critical areas. Armor and air units are transferred from other fronts, from Italy, from France, from Army Group North Ukraine, weakening resistance against the Western Allies. The operational reserve that might have contained Allied breakouts in Normandy or stabilized the Italian front is consumed in desperate attempts to rebuild a line in the east. In subsequent operations linked to Bagration's success, substantial German forces became isolated in the Courland pocket in Latvia, unable to influence the main fronts. Around 300,000 German soldiers will remain trapped in Courland for the rest of the war, uselessly defending territory that has no strategic value. Doctrinal significance is recognized in post-war analyses. Soviet and Western staff studies view Bagration as a demonstration of mature Soviet operational art, integrating deception, partisans, and deep offensive operations. The coordination of multiple fronts, the use of maskirovka to achieve surprise, the employment of massed artillery and armor in breakthrough sectors, and the rapid exploitation by mobile forces, all reflect a sophisticated understanding of modern war. The outcome links directly to the shortening of the war's remaining timeline. After mid-1944, German strategy is reduced to delaying actions rather than attempts to reverse the situation. No operational counteroffensive in the East can succeed. No strategic reserve exists. The initiative belongs entirely to the Allies. Despite its strategic impact, territorially, militarily, and doctrinally, Bagration never attains the same recognition in Western public memory as operations fought on the Western Front. D-Day, Normandy, the Battle of the Bulge, the crossing of the Rhine, these are the battles remembered in Western narratives. Bagration, which destroyed a quarter of the German army in the East, remains a specialist subject. 1945 to the present, historiography in the Soviet Union, Russia, and the West. Post-war publications and films in different countries tell different stories. Soviet accounts highlight Byelorussian operations as central triumphs of the Red Army and proof of the success of Soviet operational doctrine. Western popular histories focus on Normandy, the Ardennes, and other Western battles. Eastern Front coverage often compresses or glosses over Bagration. Soviet narrative presents Bagration as a central triumph within the broader framework of the Great Patriotic War. Soviet historians emphasize the role of the Communist Party, the genius of Soviet commanders, and the superiority of Soviet doctrine. Films, books, and commemorations celebrate the liberation of Belarus and the destruction of Army Group Center. The operation became part of the founding myth of the post-war Soviet state. Western narrative, especially during the Cold War, prioritizes Western operations due to political focus and archival access. Anglo-American histories and documentaries naturally emphasize campaigns in which their own forces participated. Eastern Front coverage, when it appears, often focuses on Stalingrad and Kursk, battles already well known in the West. Bagration, despite its scale, receives limited attention. Archival access plays a role. Limited access to Soviet General Staff archives until late in the 20th century constrains Western research. Detailed monographs by historians using newly accessible sources appear decades after the war. Glantz, Naipold, Connor, and others produce comprehensive studies based on Soviet operational documents. These works, published from the 1980s onward, gradually shifted professional understanding. Recent reassessments by institutions such as major museums and academic presses increasingly identify Bagration as one of the decisive operations of the war. Characterizations like the greatest defeat in German military history and a true deep battle victory appear in analyses from the Imperial War Museum, the Hoover Institution, and academic journals. Professional historians now recognize Bagration's significance, even if public awareness lags behind. Narrative focus shapes public understanding of the war. How Bagration's relative obscurity in popular memory distorts perceptions of where and how the Wehrmacht suffered its greatest defeats is an open question. The Eastern Front consumed the majority of German military resources. The Soviet Union inflicted the majority of German casualties. Yet Western public memory often underweights these facts. The central quantitative facts remain: roughly 28 German divisions destroyed, around 450,000 German casualties, hundreds of kilometers of territory liberated, Soviet forces reaching the Vistula and East Prussia, and Soviet casualties exceeding 700,000. Operation Bagration did not merely push back the Eastern Front. It dismantled the central structure of the Wehrmacht, making the defeat of Nazi Germany a matter of time and logistics rather than operational maneuver. If you value detailed, archival-based military history presented without dramatization, consider subscribing or sharing this work so more lesser-known but decisive operations like Operation Bagration can be documented in full.